Welcome to the Association 100 podcast. The A100 podcast is an extension of our Association 100 bi-monthly newsletter that focuses on best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies and tactics that work in the world of associations. The podcast will feature meaningful conversations with association professionals across the country, taking a deeper dive into trending topics, offering insights that both inform and inspire. Welcome back to the A100 podcast. I'm Colleen Gallagher, and I'm joined by my co-hosts today, Meghan, Henning, and Christine Stay. For today's conversation, we're going to have a discussion around building high-performing teams and dedicated employees and how an association can do that and how it can help them succeed. So Meghan, talk to me a little bit about the importance. Why do you need a strong team? I know it seems obvious, but let's get into it.
Well, I think that when you're putting together a team, people talk about this all the time, and I think that there is really a method to it. Figuring out, when we started our company, you have to figure out, who do you need on your team? It's kind of like baseball. Do we need a first baseman? We need a second baseman. We need a third baseman. We need, I should know this more because I'm married to somebody and I have produced a softball player, but I think that you have to take a big look at what is it that you need because you start off and you get so excited and you think, well, this person is great and I should hire them. And sometimes those things work, but I do think assessing who do you need on your team? Do you need, in our world, do we need a social media person, a person dedicated to social media? Do we need a writer? Do we need somebody who has experience in the clients that we service? Do you need background on those things? So I think that figuring out your team before you assemble it is probably a really smart move, and maybe not necessarily a move that's always taken, especially with associations where they've had certain roles and they're not maybe assessing, do we still need this? Or could this be part of a different role, or, could it morph into something else? Was it successful? So I think that it is important to have, the right people on your team, but you also need to know what the right positions are before you fill them.
Agreed,
yeah,
Meghan.
When I think with associations, so many are in that small and mid-sized category, and your team is so important. So if you don't have the right people in place, it doesn't matter what you do, how many great initiatives you come up with, you're not going to succeed. So you've got to have that group that's dedicated, that's going to help push you forward and really help you reach your goals. It starts, like you said, Meghan, with that hiring process. So let's talk about the hiring piece first, and how do you find those people? Because, as a PR firm, we certainly have seen those challenges as we've tried to grow and build our team. It's not easy. And it's all over the news now that it's really hard to hire people and find people for jobs. So,
Yeah.
What do you think? What are some of the best tips for the hiring process and trying to find those right fit people for your team?
Well, I think this is also such a crucial subject because of working from home also kind of throws in a little bit of that wrench into the system, the old school system, quote unquote, about, you hire somebody, they come in, you interview them in person. So I think you also, you have to take in that consideration also, that you're just sometimes, to get the best quality people, they might not be in your area geographically as well. But yeah, I think just having a solid hiring process in general, and whether that means that you do a round of questions to get to know the person, personally and professionally, as well as maybe having something assigned to them, like a writing piece or a design piece if you're going to have a designer, seeing what they can do kind of in a time crunch and under pressure, I think helps. And I've been in that other set where I've had to do that, and it's not fun, but at the same time, your job is to hire the best kind of people. So
yes. And I think you're totally right. In some respects, I feel like it's like dating, right? You need to see like what the person is like when they're sick, when they're upset, when they're stuck in traffic, because you do need to figure that out. It isn't just work. And especially because as you mentioned, it's virtual. So you're in their home. Like we're all sitting right now and we're in each other's homes. And so it's not just about the work. It really, it is about, will they gel with everyone else too? Because that nothing is worse than, we've all been in like, certainly like associations or companies where there's a whole bunch of people that just don't fit. And then that does affect your work. You're like, oh, I don't really know that person, or they seem mean, so I'm not going to ask them, when that's their job, and that can turn into a really big problem.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think during the interview process, one of the things you can do is kind of shift the way you ask questions. I think a lot of times we say, what would you do in this situation? Are you good at working in tight deadlines? Are you good at that? And instead of just, of course, people are prepared for those. They know how to say the right things. Instead, try to get an example from them. Talk to me about a time you did this and how did you handle it? What was something you worked on that you were proud of? Those kind of questions where you're actually hearing things they did and how they reacted in those situations, rather than just the hypothetical. Well, of course, everyone in their hypothetical world would do the right thing and say the right thing. So having them actually give those examples and hearing what they've done in tough situations or on hard projects, things like that, can help you assess that a little bit more. I think being upfront about your culture in the interview, you've got to really tell them, this is what we do. You can say, we don't expect you to work 80 hours a week, but you can be honest that, hey, there are times where you have to work over your 40 hours. And there are times where we're busier and we expect you to be here and to do X, Y, Z. If you're not upfront with that, you can't really be mad if someone doesn't give you that once you've hired them.
So true.
I think transparency is really key, and it's going to make that person want to work for you more, or they might decide this is not for me. I was in an interview process and they told me, okay, it was going to be 2 events that you'd work on for the year, and that you travel, and then got the job and found out it ended up being like 8 or 9 events. But because they're called like meetings and not events,
Wow.
Yeah. So and it just puts a damper on things. It just makes you kind of like question, like, what else is you just can't trust. There's no trust there then. So
true. Because you feel lied to.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to feel lied to. And you certainly don't, as an employee, you certainly don't want that. And as a manager, I do think there can be this fear of, well, I don't want to scare you. I don't want to scare you away. But like, yes, this isn't a 9-to-5 job. Like sometimes this will go later. This will go shorter. We might need this, just as you were saying, Colleen. But I do think there's that fear of scaring someone away without, with your own honesty,
Yeah.
And if they're scared away by that, then they're probably not going to be a great fit for your team.
That's so true. I think one other thing that I had on my mind on this was something, because we've talked with some of our clients about this actually. One is the power of age diversity in the workforce. And then obviously we've talked a lot about DEI and others, and the power of ethnic diversity too. And sometimes when we think the right fit, we think we need people just like us. And so I think that people are starting to learn is having different ideas, different perspectives, ages, backgrounds. Wow, that can bring so much to a team. Mm-hmm. But boy, do you have to be really conscientious in the hiring process to actually make that. It's not easy by any means.
No, because I feel like you gravitate toward yourself. You're a version of yourself. You think, oh, this person's great.
They'll fit in.
Yeah, right. And then you find out that, and I think this comes back to making sure you have your right team. Because what do you need? Like, a lot of times you have to think about, okay, here's what I'm good at. But here's what I really need. I don't need another version of me. I need somebody better than me at X, Y, and Z. And therefore, I should be on the lookout for that.
I think as managers and upper management, you have to also be self-aware. I think a lot of time, knowing what you need, but being okay with saying that. Like, I don't know social media as much. I need someone. I think sometimes people get like, I know everything because I'm, the top dog. And it's being self-aware with that. And also what you were saying before, Meghan, about knowing who you want on your team, reevaluating. It's okay to be like, you know what, this position, it's not working out. Totally. And that's okay. Let's take a step back and see what we do need. Just having that self-awareness, I think that shows a lot on a good management style as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. And Meg, I think you hit the nail on the head with it. So many associations just have these roles they've always had. And maybe it's time to rethink. Because things have changed. I mean, the pandemic wildly changed how a lot of associations operate. Even before the pandemic, I think a lot of associations realized, oh my gosh, we rely too much on one annual event for all our revenue, or just on membership dues, depending on how your association is structured.
Definitely,
and
yes.
Your staff was probably set to meet those goals. And if you're doing things totally different now, you got to step back.
Yes. And I do think that, assessing it maybe every 6 months, even just to take a look at, are your employees happy? Have you found an employee that, for example, if in my lifetime, I have told people that, told prospective people, I could do anything with social media. Now, both of you should laugh because you know that is not my strong suit. But I have said it. I have totally said it. Like, how hard could this be? I'm sure I could learn it. I think that finding out, even in jobs where I have said it and have gotten the job, I have then, you try to work that out. But, in one job that I had, I discovered that I liked, speech writing, which was not something I would have even known or mentioned. And, I was able to have a conversation with my manager to say, I feel like here's where my strengths lie. And here's why I feel like this would still be a good fit, even while I was there. I think that, but I felt that I had a very strong communication with my boss that I could say that. If you still want me to be focused on this part, I will. But I feel like I'm seeing this need and I would rather do that. And it did work out. He was like, great. And for better or for worse, I ended up doing that for 10 years. But it was where I belonged.
And it sounds like you were happier, and a happy employee is very, very key to the success of a, association or company.
Yes.
Right. And I truly believe we can find those hard, dedicated workers, and associations can. And I know it's easy to fall into that, well, kids these days mentality. We're not going to hire anyone that's going to be able to work. But I think people have been saying that for every generation.
Yes.
And so my hope is that associations still can find plenty out there. But I think once you get past that hiring process, the next piece, which Christine, I know you are really well versed in, is that onboarding and professional development side of things. And how can you take that aspect of it to really make sure you're building and developing that dedication in a new employee?
Yeah. I mean, first things first is just having an onboarding process. I think most people can say that they have been thrown to the lion's den a lot of times when they started a job or two out there. And there is nothing a worse feeling than feeling like you don't know what's going on. You feel lost. You feel like you can't do this job. It's an awful feeling. You feel like a failure. So we have to set up those tools to make sure that we're just starting it at a good point with that employee. And that means having a solid onboarding process in place. And that is, meeting with everybody in the company, even if that person's not going to be directly working with the other, just so they know everybody in the company, what their purpose is, what they do, what, they can go to them for, having documentation of different, processes in the company as well. Like, this is how we do things. You might have done different things at a different job, but this is how we do it here. If you have any feedback that would make this better, feel free. And I know it's hard at first at a job when you're like, I don't feel comfortable coming, but it's so helpful because, like you said, that's what the point of having a solid team is. So I think that, that's definitely important, is having that onboarding process in place.
And I just want to say this, an onboarding process to me was like you filled out your benefits page.
Your HR paperwork, right?
Yes.
Like that to me, I was like, oh, this is an onboarding, process. And it wasn't until we had you, Christine, and Colleen put together an entire onboarding process where when I remember looking at it the first time, I was like, oh, so this is an onboarding process. Like it wasn't just like, here's, who's your emergency contact?
Yep.
Here's like all these like random things that you think, oh, well, this could take a half hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real process.
And again, it sets up that success for that employee, because that's what you want to do. And you don't want them getting that anxiety feeling. And that goes also with setting up for success for professional development, that we just want them to continue to succeed as they're growing, as they feel more comfortable in your association and your company.
Yeah, and I think professional development in associations is tough. There are some that are very good at it, but I feel like, I know in my experience personally, I was so busy, there was never time for going to conferences and courses. There was a lot of time I spent on my own learning how to do various things for the job, but I was never given that chance and opportunity to do formal training within my job, I think, at a lot of the associations I worked at. I will say at CTA, I think they were good at that. They were very good at that. And I remember it was like set up at the beginning of the year where you had to plan. And I remember Meghan, you helping me that year, like decide like where are the areas I need to learn and what conferences can help with that. So it's certainly something that some associations do well and others have a ways to go in, I think.
And you're very good at that, Colleen. Like you're a very big proponent of professional development and letting your employees shine and succeed, which it is. And you make sure that we have the time to do so. Cause like you said, especially with associations, you're running around like chickens without a head. So it's like, when do I have time to do this? But making a manager, giving you that time and noticing that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, you just saying this now, I'm wondering is that, when we're talking about expectations and the, communicating right from the start, and that has been what we, certainly at OnWrd and UpWrd have done, you will be we will invest in you in a professional development, as opposed to, well, I've been here a year and oh God, it's on my to-do list. Cause then you're never doing it, because no one ever gets through their to-do list and no one's ever getting through their own personal development to-do list. So I love that, that you've always been a proponent of this and that it's top of mind from day one. You don't wait where you're like, oh, I keep forgetting to bring this up. You don't. You already know what this is. And I feel like that itself is so attractive and should be so attractive to an employee. That is definitely something, because technically it's extra, but to me, it's always, wow, you must really believe in me, because why would you want to invest this money in me when I'm not sitting at my desk? I'm going to go somewhere. I'm not going to work.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it is that investment. And when you're talking about trying to build dedicated teammates, investing in them and showing them you care about their development is huge. And it's that age old saying of, I don't want to spend this money if I invest in them and then they leave. But what happens if you don't and they stay? So
I love that.
I love that line too.
That is great. Yes.
That always gives me goosebumps.
I know, right? Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you get through that onboarding, you focus on professional development, not just that first year, but throughout people's careers and people at different levels. Then there's just creating that overall culture of dedication and that feeling of people being bought in. So what goes into that? How can an association really help foster that?
I think trust, number one, being able to trust that management has your back or your coworkers have your back. That's when, I've been in the weeds before with work and, and every so often you're like, I'm really struggling here, and having a team to back you up, it just sets you up so well. And you just feel comfortable and you feel like, okay, this is my home. Like I feel good here.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. And I think that, you know, for in associations or companies, the fairness, I know that seems like so crazy, but I think that when you don't have an environment where people are treated about as fair as they can be, it leads to toxicity. You know, it ends with, there's nothing worse than thinking, wow, there's someone on our team that doesn't do anything and everybody knows about it, but nobody does anything about it. And I think that when you are working and working and working and you watch somebody do very little and yet the whole team is congratulated, it becomes very frustrating. And I used to think, as in that employee situation, that reflected to me, in my opinion, on my manager so poorly, where I would think, like, why aren't you doing something? Yeah. You have the ability and the power to fix this situation, and you're choosing not to. And, you know, positivity, like negativity, I think is very contagious. And your employees are going to talk. And you want them to talk positively. You want to say, wow, look at how my manager handled this. And it's not about being fired. It could be like, who knows what was going on with that person that I didn't even look into, right? But millions of different things could have happened. And I felt at the time, my manager should have done something. And I don't know what that would have done, you know, what that means. But I do think that vigilance of your manager paying attention to what you're doing, how you're acting, are you participating, are you like withdrawn, is important.
That's so powerful, because you think about it, when you're at that upper management level, sometimes it's really hard to make those decisions to let someone go or to call someone out. And in your mind, you're thinking, well, we're getting this done. But what you're creating is that toxic environment where everyone else is pissed that everyone gets credit for the work they're doing alone and things like that. So thinking about it from that perspective of what are your employees watching and seeing you do? Wow. Yeah.
Because I think it's a lot of leadership is role modeling, right? Like, what do you take what you've seen over the years, both good and bad, to figure out, well, how could I be an effective manager and what makes sense, you know, for me. But I even think, going back to all that we've discussed, like, how do you want to be communicated? How do you want to be managed? Do you want me to tell you that this isn't what I wanted? Or do you want me to just sort of skim through? I always want to know. Tell me, like, was it terrible what I sent? Did I miss the mark? Because I am taking, like, obviously you're hoping everyone's taking pride in their work, but you know, when you see something come back redlined and you're like, oh, wow, that's really painful. You're hoping that you don't just hit accept all changes and you're moving on, right? You want to be able to say, like, if Colleen sends me something and it's redlined, I'm immediately calling, oh my God, where did I go wrong? So, like, could we have a 5-minute conversation where it's like, well, actually, all I really wanted you to do was blank, and you decided to write me half of a book, and I didn't want that. So, okay, like, it's great to know that versus never seeing the document again and never knowing that she hated everything that I sent her. I want to know. So that's important to me, and I feel like that makes me feel like my manager, cares about me, and they took the time to be like, this isn't what I wanted, or you went in the wrong direction. They're not mean about it, but I'm being told, because what if I did spend 4 hours doing something nobody wanted?
Oh, I think we've all been there.
Yes. And so that's terrible, but you only want that to happen once.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on the flip side of constructive criticism is also providing that praise and recognition when it is there. I mean, it goes so far. You know, it's so funny. You think of all these ways you can reward your employees. Do we need to increase salaries? Do we need to do this? And yes, everyone cares about money. You know, that is obvious. But you can't underestimate too the power of, wow, this was great work, and saying that, and knowing your people, because some people would love to have that said in front of everyone at team meeting. Other people would crawl under a desk if you did that to them. So understanding, are they someone that wants to be praised in public and get that praise there, or do they need it in the one-on-one to say, I love this, you're doing great, keep this up, and figuring that out.
Yes, I totally agree. And I do think a thank you and a good job goes a long way, and being specific. I loved that you did, I loved what this is because, and it is specific, and you're like, oh, okay, thanks. They did get what I was aiming for. And again, it's back to being recognized, which is what we all want.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think the next step too is, you talked about being able to give me a call when, I send something, I might have edits, and ask questions. And I think you really need to create an environment where people feel comfortable calling anything out. If it's something, an association, maybe something happened with a board member at an event that really, upset you. You need to be in an environment where you can go tell your boss that, tell HR that, whoever the right person is. There has to be somewhere or someone for your teammates to go to express when things are tough or when they're not working.
Yeah, otherwise they'll feel very alone.
Yeah, and Christine, you said you want to feel like your team and your job, your manager has your back. And that is so important. I do think that is really important.
I know that makes me a better employee. So there's a trickle effect to that.
Agreed.
So Christine, you talked at the very beginning about a hybrid work environment, having some people remote, some people in person, or fully remote, things like that. That's obviously a big challenge to creating dedicated employees and building a culture. What are your thoughts around that as someone who has worked remote for a long time?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think that open communication, being, with your manager saying, these are my hours. I think also keeping your whole team updated with your hours. A staff calendar is something so small, but it's really good to know when everybody's working, when you can reach everybody. Having the resources like a staff calendar, but also we use Slack, which is so helpful. It's for those who don't know, it's kind of like the old school AIM where you message everybody. And I never feel like I'm anybody's watching me. It's more just really keeps that line of communication open that's constant, which is really, really important working from home. I know having weekly one-on-ones, manager-employee one-on-ones where you can address concerns or projects, that's really important. Team meetings, I think, adds to that element of team camaraderie. And I know that we've been implementing every week a fun question.
And that came from one of our junior employees that suggested doing that.
And so great. Honestly, I look forward to it every week. It's just so fun. And it's really getting, to get to know everybody a little bit more on a personal level, which again, I think that trickles down into professional level too. I just think, you just have to be active. It's easy, I think, to not have that in place. And then all of a sudden you're just stuck at home and you're just working on your computer by yourself. And I think that would drive a lot of people crazy. So I think just making it as interactive as possible with the elements. And the technology is out there to do so. It's not crazy not to.
Yeah. We have one of our clients who, granted it was during the pandemic, but for anybody who, might have a large group of virtual people, they provided some, money to get together and have coffee and not even work. Just if you're, two people are oh, well, I'm in DC and I'm in Old Town, for our purposes, could you get together? Could you sit outside? Could you go somewhere? And I think that type of connection, and again, back to our fun question, the more you get to know somebody, the better, I just feel in general, the better the working relationship that you will have, because, we have people all over the place. We have somebody who's not even in the United States, and it would be very easy for us to feel so distant from Julie. But instead, these questions, they're funny. And so they've they've revealed all these things that that would take a while of sitting next to somebody day in and day out. And we've sped up that process, which I think is great.
Oh my gosh, I love that part. And it's funny because I used to be the person that was like in team meetings being like, oh my God, don't make me do other stuff. I have work to do. Like, let me just get back to it. So I was really hesitant to do something like that. And then when Kimi came to me and suggested this idea and thought it would be good, I was like, okay, we'll give it a shot if people buy in. And oh my gosh, it just turned out to be the best part of our weekly team meeting. So
it really is.
I know. So we've talked a bit before on an earlier podcast about the quiet quitting. And I think that's what creating a dedicated team is trying to avoid. Mm-hmm. So how did we get there where associations have these employees who are just mailing it in essence? How did they spot that? How do you get that? I mean, we've talked about a lot of steps along the way. Are there any other tips, feedback, suggestions you guys have to help associations dealing with employees like this?
I also think just not overworking employees, because I think that is also
burnout.
Yeah, the burnout. And then I think people just get like, okay, I'm done. I'm just going to sit here and do as little as possible until like somebody talks to me about it. Honestly, I think recognizing burnout symptoms as well.
Yeah.
And then we know it's hard in any company in the culture that we live in now where it's very fast paced, but I think a good manager has to recognize that.
Yeah. I think too, this goes back to no one's looking at you. No one's paying attention. If you are quiet quitting, if you come in every day and you keep your head down and you look like you're working, and people walk by, if you're in your cube and you're like, oh, here I am typing or whatever, and I'm really like emailing my mother or I'm making my laundry or grocery list or something, it's because no one sees you that you feel, I would think, I'm sure I've experienced a form of quiet quitting myself. But I would think that the mindset would be, well, I can do this because no one's paying attention to me. No one seems to care about me. And I think that, while having not been in this situation, I wonder if an employee or a manager could say, it seems like you're just not really happy in this role.
Yeah.
Would that be a freeing thing if you were like, oh my God, no, I'm not. I would rather do blank. And what if you found out, wow, they were really good at, design? And you didn't know that, because they took a job because they needed a job and they filled that. Now they're bored. And so again, I just think it goes back to, you need to touch base with your employees. And as Colleen, you said, you need to be very honest and upfront. And I feel like that has to come from the manager, not necessarily because the manager is going to set the tone. So if your manager's up front, then you will eventually feel up front, but clearly you're not up front if you're quiet quitting. Like you're bored, and your manager should try to figure out why are you bored and can they fix it?
Yep. Definitely. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I think, we hit on kind of 4 key points in that life cycle for associations to think about. So creating that dedicated team, it starts with the hiring process. Next is honing in on that real true onboarding process and an ongoing professional development. Dedicated time to building and creating, fostering that dedicated culture. And then being able to continue and sustain it and overcome challenges along the way. So it never ends. If you want a good team, you always have to be thinking about, how are we building this team? How are we pulling this team together? Is it still good? And Megan, you nailed it earlier when you said it's a constant reassessment. It's not, we did it, there we go, we're done. It's every few months checking back in and figuring that out.
Yeah, this is great.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks guys. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Association 100 podcast, brought to you by the A100 publishing team, powered by OnWrd and UpWrd Marketing and Communications. You can subscribe to the Association 100 podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all of your favorite podcast listening apps so you'll never miss out. Or listen via our website at theassociation100.com. Follow us on Twitter at Association100. That's Association100. for all the latest insights and trends impacting the world of associations. Thanks for tuning in.